Hello viewers, you join me for the 5th Patreon monthly live stream. This is the live stream for May and it is part of the reward scheme for my Patreon backers. It's an opportunity to interact a little bit more with the people who are supporting my work behind the scenes. So if you're one of those who's just tuning in live, hello. I hope you're all doing well wherever in the world you happen to be. And hello from Northern California, says Linda Lawson. Hello, Linda. It's a thrill to be able, thanks to the miracle of modern technology, to interact with you. Much too tired to say thank you, made it. Yes, I understand that with the time zones and everything, it isn't always easy to attend these live streams, because I do hangouts as well for Patreon, and I understand it doesn't always work out so well when it comes to the time zones. But for those of you who have made it, welcome. And I'm going to try and get straight into some of the questions, because while those of you who are watching live think of things to ask me in the live chat, I'm going to start with some questions that have already been asked on Patreon, because obviously I've posted this live stream to Patreon, and I always say, if you've got some questions I can get started with, please ask them in the comments section. And sure enough, I've got some that I can get my teeth into straight away, which is fantastic. So Garrett says, if you are answering questions, Lloyd, please explain why the authorities in the United States haven't raided the headquarters of the Watchtower Society and seized their computers and arrested the governing body. They have the list of 20,000 names of pedophiles on their record books, and no one in government cares, ? Really? But they expect me to pay a parking ticket or will pull me over if I have a headlight out. Really? Garrett, I share your frustration. That's an excellent way of putting it. You can get into trouble, not just in America, but in lots of other countries, for doing far, far less than what Watchtower is doing when it comes to its systematic cover-up of child abuse. And you point out, I mean, we don't know whether it's exactly 20,000. It's very likely, in my opinion, more than 20,000. We don't know the exact number, but we do know that Watchtower is keeping records of cases of child sex abuse. How is that not of interest to the FBI? I mean, they're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It's their job to investigate crimes. They have, in my opinion, all the evidence they need that Watchtower has this information. Why are they not kicking down the door? So I think that the simple kind of ugly truth is that we live in an age where, especially in countries like the United States, there is a deference, an undue deference given to religion. So that religions are basically allowed to get away with pretty much anything. And this is not just me talking. This is something that Owen Zalkin touched on as well in the Reveal conference. I think it was back in April 2017. So just over a year ago now. Gosh, I can't believe how quickly time flies. But he said that when it comes to litigating against Watchtower, when the case goes to appeal, even if it's a very kind of straightforward case where Watchtower's been caught out, it isn't as straightforward as saying, oh, Watchtower's going to lose, because of the issue of deference, and because if you're a religion in the United States, you're treated with kid gloves, and you're let off the hook more easily. And I was actually thinking about this question before coming on, and it just occurs to me that even if you're watching this as a religious person, and I accept that lots of my viewers will be religious. I and I don't begrudge them that. I think it's inevitable that there will be religion and people who derive comfort from religion. But I think that even if you're religious, you have to accept that when you give religion too much respect, this is what happens. So you can complain if you like about people like myself mocking or ridiculing the Bible or Christianity or religion. And you can say that that's unfair, but you also have to accept that if you give religion too much leeway, and if you say, oh, well, we're not allowed to scrutinize it, we're not allowed to mock it or ridicule it, these are people's beliefs. They should be given reverence. This is what you get, unfortunately. You get governments that won't go into headquarters where they know child abuse records are being kept, and who just let organisations like Watchtower off the hook. So unfortunately, the short answer to your question, Garrett, is that we're living at the wrong point in history, because I believe that in future generations this will be acted on, and they will look back at this period in time and think, why on earth in the 21st century did the US government know or have reason to know that there was these records being kept and they weren't doing anything? I think that future generations will be appalled at what's being at the way that this is being ignored. I've spent a lot of time on that question, but at least I've answered it. Moving on to Greg Evans, who says, do you think you would have woken up sooner if JW Broadcasting had started 10 years earlier than it did? When I watch it, I can't imagine, even at my most zealous, I would have thought it was good. With the convention videos as well, do you think it might actually help to wake more up than if they had never started it? That's a really good question. And I've gone backwards and forwards on this, because if you watch my first ever rebuttal, JW Broadcasting rebuttal, which I think is on over 100,000 views now, because it's the first one, and that was before I started showing the clips. I was just literally talking about what I'd just seen, and I made the point that, you know, this is a gift to apostates, to ex-witnesses, because it's like an emperor's clothes situation where Watchtower doesn't understand how silly they look, or their leaders look, when they go on camera. And it actually is easier to respect these leaders when you can't see them. When your mind is able to build this myth, this legend of who they are as people. When you see them on camera, especially on a monthly basis or a 2-monthly basis in the case of the governing body members, you see lots of things you'd rather not see if you want to believe that they are conduits of divine wisdom. Having said that, since making those comments, I have met people who are still like physically and mentally out people, who've told me that actually witnesses, even in like the UK, where you have the issue of dealing with an American accent, which is an issue, I'm sorry, it is, but even in the UK, witnesses love JW Broadcasting episodes. They love them. And thinking about it, I can kind of understand that when you are a Jehovah's Witness, you learn to ignore the ugly stuff and the cringeworthy stuff, or you learn to kind of dismiss it. Oh, well, I can forgive that, and you almost kind of zero in on the stuff that does make sense, or the stuff that does reach through to you, or that you find compelling. And in JW Broadcasting episodes, of course, you have lots of very manipulative, heart-tugging, pulling on the emotions material. And if I had been a Jehovah's Witness watching that, it would have had an effect on me. And I probably would have found a reason to just think about that rather than think about Stephen Lett asking for money or or that bizarre bread thing. You're able to pass the things that don't make sense and cling to the things that do or that you can relate to. So the simple answer is I have no idea. I have no idea whether I would have been able to wake up purely from watching JW Broadcasting episodes. I like to think that it would have accelerated things at the very least. But it all boils down to never underestimate cult mind control and how compelling it can be. It does find a way of reaching through. So I've got some more questions that I can go to, but I'd better go to the live chat, which I can see some stuff popping up. I don't want to ignore you guys. Much Too Tired Too says, I hear you but no video. Be right back. Better reload. There you are. Oh good. I'm glad that the technical issues were sorted there. Much Too Tired, despite your tiredness. And Becky says, can you recommend any YouTube channels or blogs to follow, atheist or XJW? Gosh, that is a great question. Fifth, XJW Fifth is a fantastic channel. I really like his style of doing interviews. I'm in awe of Cameron Fader and his cinematography skills. So check Cameron Fader out. Who else? So there's Susan Gaskin. She does great videos. Actually, there's some old stuff that hasn't been updated for a while. Ex-Gilead Missionary is a brilliant channel. And I kind of mourn a little bit that he's not still making videos, but he made videos years ago, as in sort of around the time that I was waking up. And some of his videos are superb, especially for reasoning with witnesses who are only just waking up. As far as atheist content is concerned, I follow Rationality Rules, Cosmic Skeptic, Alex O'Connor, who's a friend of mine. I follow Matt Dillahunty. I follow Seth Andrews, the Thinking Atheist. My subscriptions, my list of subscriptions doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So, and I'm still kind of finding my way with YouTube, because obviously when you're making videos, you don't have as much time or quite as much time to watch them. But I am trying to slowly build up my my subscriptions to other content creators who do stuff similar to me, and I'm always on the lookout for opportunities to collaborate and learn from other content creators. I hope that answers your question. Chris Shelton as well. If you're not watching Chris Shelton, go over to his channel, and because we, after all, formed the three apostates: myself, Chris, and Jonathan Streeter, who's an ex-Mormon. So, and I believe we're going to be doing an episode of that soon, so look out for that. Linda Lawton says, just saw a clip that Elizabeth Vargas will be doing a show on cults the end of May on A&E Network. Yeah, more exposure. I too have seen that trailer, and I understand that Jehovah's Witnesses will feature. Honestly, it took me by surprise. I didn't know, frankly, if I'm being completely honest, I didn't know who Elizabeth Vargas was. But I saw the clip, and I didn't know about her series, and I agree with you. It's fantastic to see so much exposure, and I think that frankly A&E are to be applauded for going down this road of really delving into cults, because quite frankly there's a fertile ground there. For if you're going to deal with reality, you know, what better than to deal with organizations that warp reality in order to control people? it's happening, and it affects so many lives. So not just purely from a JW perspective, but from the perspective of someone who doesn't like the idea of people being manipulated. I want to see this sort of content, and I'm really glad that there is so much of it, or there is signs that there will be more of it in the future. Linda Lawton also says, I've heard through the grapevine that memorial attendance was way down this year. Have you heard the same? Linda, no, I'm afraid I haven't heard anything yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was down, but we'll wait and see what the figures are. But I do hear stories through the grapevine about empty Kingdom Halls and Kingdom Hall merges and empty seats, and that seems to be a recurring theme. If you go on Reddit, you encounter these sorts of stories, and I find it encouraging to think that that Jehovah's Witnesses might be on the verge of actually reducing in numbers. I mean, in a way they are already, because they're only able to keep a very, very modest growth figure due to indoctrinating children, quite frankly. If you look at the baptism figures, they are barely keeping their heads above water, and actually when you compare baptisms with the growth figures, you notice that there's a large number of people, or a growing number of people, who are finding their way to freedom. And so I find all of that very encouraging, and I hope we see more of it. I'm going to go over to, I've got one more live chat question waiting for me, but I'm going to wait for a few more and go back to my Patreon questions. And let me see what's next. Becky Alvarez, I think, is the next one. Yes, Becky Alvarez says, what questions would you suggest to ask the Jehovah's Witnesses at their carts? I don't want to antagonize them, just maybe trigger them to start thinking. Becky, that's a fantastic question. I did attempt something like this in my Disneyland video, and I hope to make more of that style of video where I'm involving myself in what's called street epistemology. And I can reveal that there will be, or actually I'm not revealing it because I've already talked about it on Twitter, but I've recorded an interview with Anthony Magnabosco, who is kind of the expert on, or he's the main advocate, shall we say, of street epistemology. So I've already recorded the interview. It's just a case of editing it and uploading it, and that will be in the next few days. But we had a fantastic conversation along these lines of how do we approach this? What's our goal here? And my goal, certainly when I was doing the Disneyland video or having that conversation, my goal wasn't really to win any arguments or to win any battles. I was really, sorry, it keeps flashing bad connection. I hope I'm being heard. I was really just interested in hearing from the mouth of a Jehovah's Witness what a Jehovah's Witness believes, because quite frankly that is ludicrous enough without me trying to prove any point or thrust information in their faces. It's crazy enough what a Jehovah's Witness is forced to believe. And in the case of that conversation, I wanted him to say what the beliefs are regarding Armageddon, specifically the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses look forward to the destruction of billions of people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, and look forward to inhabiting a world where everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness, or everyone who doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness, will have been slaughtered. I wanted him to admit that, and it took about 2 or 3 attempts, but finally he did admit it, which I credit him for, because I'm not sure all Jehovah's Witnesses would admit it. I think some would try and make excuses for it or try and obfuscate in some way. But yeah, that's really my approach, is let's hear what you actually are supposed to believe, and let's hear you say it. Because maybe by you saying it as it really is, just you saying it might be enough for you to go home and think, gosh, when I'm really pushed on this, it does sound silly. It does sound, there are red flags here. What on earth am I doing? So that would be my approach, would be, tell me what you believe. I would say, I have family who are Jehovah's Witnesses. I know a bit about the religion. I'm interested in hearing what you think and what your beliefs are. Is it true that everyone, including me, who isn't a Jehovah's Witness or has no plans to become a Jehovah's Witness, can look forward to being annihilated in the near future? And let them share that. And another thing you could do, if you really want to make them squirm, is say, so I've really enjoyed this conversation and you've given me a lot to think about. I think what I'll do is I'll go home and I'll jump on Google and find out everything I can about Jehovah's Witnesses and see how they react to that, and maybe have a little bit of a conversation based on their reaction to that. So those would be my tips, but I'm sure there's lots of ways that you could approach it. Faith McGinn says, "Hi Lloyd, I am a contemporary of yours." Well, I really hope so. Around the same age, I get that. But began fading in 2007. I am interested in those who are still engaged. Whatever happened to the Theocratic Ministry School? Will it survive in some form, or is it completely gone? Like you, I feel like it is one saving grace from my upbringing that helps me get jobs and have more confidence in interviews, etc. What a shame if they dismantle something that perhaps is bringing about skills building and independence. Thank you, Faith from Denver, Colorado. P.S. You and your sweet family always have a happy place to stay in Denver. My daughter is the same age. Well, that's very kind of you, Faith. If I am ever in Denver, Colorado, it's nice to know that I have somewhere to stay. But yeah, that would be lovely. As to your question, yes, basically there is no Theocratic Ministry School. What you do have is an opportunity for young, not just young, but you have an opportunity for males who are not elders and ministerial servants. You have an opportunity for men, essentially. Oh, it's saying bad connection again. I hope none of this is getting lost. You have an opportunity for men to read from the Bible before the congregation. So you have Bible readings still. That's more or less it. So you have a Bible reading, and you also have demonstrations by I think it used to be called the number 3 talk, was done by sisters, and it was essentially just a how would you handle this conversation stopper or that kind of thing. I think they have that sort of thing still, but more along the lines of how to offer literature and how to handle ministry presentations. The actual kind of practical school-like aspect of the Theocratic Ministry School is gone, so that you don't have the same kind of, and again, it was more male-oriented thinking back. This was nothing that sisters could really benefit from. But I agree that as a male, and it was unfair that it was only for males. I agree that there was a benefit to be had in being schooled on how to speak publicly, and I still look back with fondness on my Theocratic Ministry School overseer. I've got this very vivid memory of, I think I was around the age of 19 or something like that, and I gave my first ever talk. I think it was a Bible reading, I'm not sure, but I gave my first talk at the Assembly, on the Assembly platform, as part of their model Theocratic Ministry School. and I practiced for that item so hard so that I knew I could almost quote it word for word without even looking at the Bible. And I knew I was really putting feeling into it and reading it as passionately as I could. And I always remember the first meeting back after the assembly, I was more interested in his take on in his feedback than what was said at the assembly by the assembly instructor, who I think was the district overseer. And he had some my Theocratic Ministry School overseer had some really glowing things to say, and I was really thrilled. But I have fond memories basically about the Theocratic Ministry School, and I do think it's sad that that is one of the one saving graces of growing up as a Jehovah's Witness basically isn't there anymore. And if you're a young man growing up in the witness organization, basically it's just Bible readings and not the how can I put it? You're not trained on how to convince an audience, on how to prepare material, on how to convince people and argue and present information. It's just purely about reading, and I think that's really sad. But again, if you're a sister, if you're a woman, well, there's not really a great deal of change. It's still just as non-inclusive as it was before. That's my understanding. I'm happy to stand corrected if anyone's watching this further down the line. If I've misrepresented what's going on in the Kingdom Halls, by all means, because it's been a while since I've been in a Kingdom Hall. But if I've misrepresented things, please do let me know. I'm going to go back to the live chat. Let's see, here's the tab, and we'll see what's being said. Much Too Tired Too says, I recall seeing that Leah Remini was not going to do the JW episode, but don't recall the reason. Do you know what happened? That's not true. She is going to do an episode, as far as I'm aware. Much Too Tired Too says, connection is good on this end. Fantastic. I am worried about the connection because I keep getting, as I'm talking, it's very distracting, a bar come across the screen saying bad connection, and I wonder whether it's jittery or something. Terry Sanders says, I hated how the sisters had to talk to another sister and could not speak from the podium. Yes, that's what I was trying to say, is that it's a completely different, or it was a completely different experience being on the Theocratic Ministry School as a guy versus being a sister, because you were being trained as a guy on how to convince people, how to comport yourself when doing public speaking. Whereas when you are a sister, or when you were a sister in a Theocratic Ministry School, it was just purely about, let's pretend we're having a conversation. Which is just, and funnily enough, when I was at MTS, we ended up doing, obviously for that kind of thing, you have lots of different kinds of assignments on MTS. And the majority of them are giving talks, or at least giving comments from your seat. But there are also times when you have to reenact a conversation. So you would have the students coming to the table and pretending to have a conversation, including doing ministry presentations. And it was kind of commented that, oh, I bet the sisters would be really good at this because that's what they do on a Thursday night. And here we are, having to learn how to have this kind of conversation where we're almost kind of acting with the audience watching us rather than speaking to the audience, which is what we're used to. So yeah, it's so wrong that that women are snubbed in that way. But unfortunately, that's what happens when you take the Bible too seriously, because unfortunately the verses are there in the writings of Paul that the women should be silent. Terry Sanders, also on that platform, Oh gosh, it's telling me it, it's telling me that the live stream's offline, so I'm not sure what's happening. I hope I'm back on now. Much too tired to says great. I'm assuming you're reacting to something that I said previously, but I'm glad that I said something that made sense. I'm going to go to my last question from the Patreon page just to give you guys time to ask any more questions in the live chat that you may want to ask. Tamara, I would like to know, Tamara, how to pronounce your surname, because your surname, as I would say it, is Whaley, because there's actually a place near where I grew up called Whaley Bridge, and that's exactly how it's spelled. So I'm going to call you Tamara Whaley, but if it's Wally or something else, let me know. Tamara Whaley says, are there any articles that say grandparents are to shun their grandchildren too? I am so PO'd that after 26 years of associating with me, now, since last year, my father has decided to shun me and thus also my children, 16, 19, 22. I'm just disgusted that I even allowed my children to get to know him and now have them also feel betrayed. On the plus side, this was what catapulted me into the YouTube and internet rabbit hole and made me wake up. Tamara, it's abominable what cults make people do, and if it makes you feel any better, I don't know how familiar you are. I don't know how familiar you are with my story, but I'm in the same situation with my dad. I have a now 4-year-old daughter. Jessica's going to be 4 on Monday. I was actually because we bought her a trampoline for her birthday, and we were debating whether to hold it for her until her birthday. But it's such a big thing that we thought we might as well build it today. So I spent most of this afternoon wrestling with metal bars and and netting and that kind of thing. But finally it's up, and Jessica absolutely loved it, and she's already enjoying her birthday 2 days early. But she's going to be 4 and she doesn't know who her grandfather is. And I find that disgraceful. And I think that although for the most part you can attribute it to shunning, well, for the vast majority you can attribute it to shunning, because Dad believes that if he disobeys the shunning rule, then he's liable to get destroyed at Armageddon. That really is what he's thinking, I'm sure. But I just, as a parent, now that I am a parent, I can't get my head around it. How do you bring someone into the world and hold them in your arms and fuss over them and swear to protect them and just love them to the ends of the earth, so that you'd jump in front of a train to save them or do anything to protect them? How do you go from that level of adoration, of just sheer unbridled adoration, to just not caring, to just, oh, Lloyd's doing his thing, I'm not going to talk to him because he no longer believes what I believe? How do you go from those two extremes? I can't fathom it. And especially when it comes to Jessica, who doesn't know anything, I'm glad to say. She doesn't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses. She doesn't even know anything about God or the Bible. She has no concept whatsoever of anything religious, which I'm actually thrilled about, because what that means is that for at least her first 4 years, she, even though she plays next to Watchtower bound volumes and all of these cult books, I call them Daddy's cult books. Jessica, stop climbing on Daddy's cult books. even though she plays right next to this huge repository of stupidity and ignorance, she's oblivious to it. She doesn't know anything about it. And yet she's being punished. And yet she doesn't know who her grandfather is, because her grandfather thinks he's helping me by not speaking to me and not speaking to Deanna. I can't get my head around it, quite frankly. And even though we try to mention Dad when we can, like the other day I showed Jessica my dad's picture, because we have it in a picture frame. I'm not completely sure how long we'll have it in a picture frame for, to be quite honest, because I don't feel the warmth towards Dad that I did maybe a year or so ago. But I showed my dad's picture to Jessica and said, "Who is that? Who is this person?" And just blank look. Just a completely blank look. Didn't know who he was. And that's what shunning does. That is shunning in a nutshell. A child being shown a picture of her grandfather and not knowing who he is. Just a total stranger. It's like, who's this person in a picture frame? Why do we have to look at him? So, but again, that's what shunning does. And it's one of the reasons, quite frankly, why I do what I do. And that's the irony, the great irony, of course, because Dad thinks that he stands a greater chance of saving me if he behaves in this way. What he's actually doing is making the fire in my belly burn that little bit more brightly. Because if I wasn't being reminded on an almost daily basis of the fact that I'm still being penalised by a religion I no longer believe, I probably would struggle to have the same amount of energy that I have. But there you have it. He's actually making things worse, or what he's doing is counterproductive to the aims of the religion that he serves. That's the really tragic thing. So that, I think, I'm not really sure I've answered that question, but I've at least sympathised with your predicament, and I really do sympathise. I'm going to go back to the live chat, which I've noticed has been populated by more questions. Much Too Tired 2 said, "You say it correctly, this is me." I'm assuming that. Yeah, I probably said something that prompted you to say that. I can't remember now. Sorry, my head's somewhere else now. Terry Sanders says, "Seems like the shunning thing was not so strict back in the 80s when I was in." I wouldn't be able to speak to that, because in the 80s I was a child. I just remember there always was shunning for as long as I can remember, because the rules on disassociation being the same as disfellowshipping, that was brought in 1981. So we've pretty much had the same rules since at least 1981. But I suppose I can see why it would take a while for them to kind of become entrenched in the culture so that it's just accepted. And certainly in the last few years, we've seen more kind of shameless propaganda that's aimed at persuading people to shun their relatives and shun their family. So I can see why it would appear that shunning is worse, even though maybe it's been more or less the same since the 80s, at least in theory. Much Too Tired 2 says, now it makes sense. Tamara Whaley it is, and yes, that's exactly where I'm coming from. I can't fathom it at all either. So Tamara Whaley is Much Too Tired 2. Now it all makes sense. And yes, that's exactly where I'm coming from. I can't fathom it at all either. My father is an elder and 84 years old, I'm the baby of 7, and he only has contact now with 3. So with 3 out of 7, I guess. It's just awful, isn't it? And he's the loser here. He's the one who's missing out, because he's, by the sound of things, he doesn't have a great deal of time left, and he's depriving himself of meeting the next generation. It's just so tragic, but unfortunately it's very widespread, and not just in Jehovah's Witnesses either. Terry Sanders, I'm down to my last 3 on the live chat, and once I'm out, actually I do have one thing I want to share other than answering questions, which I'll maybe save for the end. Terry Sanders says, they said that we weren't supposed to discuss spiritual topics with disfellowshipped relatives. I don't remember them saying we were supposed to shun them totally. Seems they are more controlling. Yeah, that the spiritual topics thing, yeah, I see where you're coming from. It was a little bit more, that I think there were probably more loopholes in the past when it comes to the extent of shunning. I agree with you there. I'm not sure when it came in that you're not to have any contact at all. But yeah, it's worth researching that. I recall going into that kind of detail when I was researching my book, but I can't remember what the years were. But I know where you're coming from. It used to be that you could have contact with your family so long as you weren't discussing any religion, which quite frankly would suit me down to the ground. I would be more than happy to have my dad in my life, and he would not need to worry about me talking about religion. He really, really wouldn't. But yeah, it's definitely deteriorated since that was the guidance. Terry Sanders says, maybe the elders just said what they wanted in my congregation. I saw that a lot. Yes, it could be congregation to congregation. That's also another possibility. I'm down to my last 2 questions on the live chat, and then I'm gonna, if there's no more questions, I'm gonna start wrapping up. Much Too Tired 2 says, exactly, Terry, and in all those years I never brought up anything religious. Thus why when this came about I was floored. And Linda, it's now just a conversation, I think. I'm eavesdropping on your conversation at this point. Much Too Tired 2. Also, thank you very much for picking my number in the JW podcast for the free book. My pleasure. And Terry says, I wanted to say congratulations on your new book. I'm going to read it now that it is on Amazon. Thank you, Terry. And actually, that gives me the opportunity to mention that I promised that the Escape book would be on Kindle and audiobook by May the 1st. It is now on Kindle. I think it went on Kindle on May the 2nd. But the audiobook is another story, because I actually was really kind of working hard last month to get the audiobook done so that I could make it available from the beginning of May, or maybe for a few days towards the end of April. And unfortunately it's locked in a review process, so I sent the files through to Amazon thinking, oh well, they're just going to run a few algorithms and then it will be up on Amazon. But no, it's still locked in some weird review process that's taking ages. So it is in the pipeline. There will be an audiobook surely this month for How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses, and I hope some of you may find that helpful. That's it. That's all the live chat questions or comments. I just wanted to leave you guys with some statistics. I mentioned in my video exclusively for patrons that the numbers for April for the John Cedars channel were a record. So we had on the John Cedars channel 3,000 net gain in subscribers, which is just ridiculous, just for April. And we also had a record number of views, so over 500,000 views just in April, which is just ridiculous. And I'm not giving you these numbers to brag. I find it very, very encouraging that a channel like mine, which is mostly dealing with Jehovah's Witness material and resources for helping people come out of that particular religion, I find it encouraging that it's getting that kind of traffic through, because it tells me that more people are waking up. It tells me that the audience is there, that people are stumbling on material. And I worked out through the statistics that it's something like 70% of people who find my videos are finding them through either recommended videos or through browsing through the search feature on YouTube, which again, it's just brilliant. And I also looked at the YouTube now gives you the unique views. So okay, there were 500,000 views in April, but we know that you can have multiple views for one person. How many actual people does that represent? YouTube now gives me that information, and it was for April 201,000 individual people watching material on my channel in April, which I just find that so encouraging. It really, yeah, it's like this is a fantastic resource for reaching people. And the take-home message, oh, and another thing was there were 7.5 million impressions, so that means that my video came up as something that people could click on 7.5 million times. And of that, I think it worked out at something like 4%. Of that, there were 201,000 unique individuals watching videos. And the take-home message from that is that if you are interested in getting involved in activism, if you're interested in starting your own vlog, there's a ready audience there of people who are searching YouTube and stumbling on this content, because Google has just completely changed the game. Google has made it possible for you to get your message heard just by being compelling and being honest and being genuine. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about when you see videos by XJWs that do well, usually they're videos that don't require a great deal of editing, where someone's just being heartfelt in front of the camera. And I wanted to share those figures again, just to show you, if you're watching this and you're kind of thinking, oh, I might do something, you should definitely consider doing something if you're in that position, because I know not everyone is in a position to do that. I've noticed there's a few last minute live chat things. Terry Sanders says, woohoo, I'm glad your audience is growing. You do great work and help many people. Thank you, Terry. Wagon Bird says, great work. Thank you, Lloyd. Faith. Thank you, Faith. Much Too Tired 2 says, I started a meetup for XJWs and have 17 members locally, but I have yet to have anyone actually show up to a get-together. Any tips on how to encourage them to come out to meet each other? I think it's just a case of persisting, quite frankly. Keep at it. And I think once you get one or two attending, then you might find it starts to snowball. But with ex-witnesses, there's all sorts of reasons why someone might not be in a position yet to start coming to places in person. So just try to persist with it, and best of luck in doing that meetup. I think meetups are a great way of ex-cult members to get some kind of recovery, some kind of help with their recovery. And Wagon Bird suggests, ask them if they want to receive a text reminder of your upcoming event. Wagon Bird, that's a fantastic suggestion. And Becky says you can go to Social Blade and see Lloyd's statistics. It is impressive. I hadn't thought of that. Yes, I'm sure other people can see my statistics too, not just me. Terry Sanders, I've never been to a meetup. I would be interested in going as long as it wasn't an angry meetup. Yeah, you don't want to go to an angry meetup. And I think I'm going to leave it there with the live chat, which is just lighting up now as I'm leaving. But listen, guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's just been a small crowd this month. Hopefully there'll be more on the next live stream. But I've certainly had a lot to get my teeth into, and I really appreciate some of the fantastic questions and comments that I've received. That's been fantastic. As always, I really do appreciate the support I'm getting on Patreon, which is just beyond words. It's helping me to do things, to do what I'm doing on a level that I never would have contemplated. So I really am appreciative. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope you have enjoyed this live stream. I am now going to do the awkward thing where I try and close the screen down. But thank you for watching.